CEE,
Central Europe Explained,
an IDM podcast series
powered by Erste Group.
Episode 4,
Coal and Steel versus Iron. Lessons for today. European collusion and history of European rapprochement with Ambassador Emil Brix. A warm welcome to everyone in this new episode of CEE, Central Europe Explained. My name is Martínek and I am a research associate at IDM, Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe in Vienna. I'm here today with Ambassador Emil Brix, director of the Vienna School of International Studies and, at the same time, member of the IDM Managing Board in Vienna. Hello, Ambassador Brix, and thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Welcome.
Today we are going to discuss together the creation of the EU and its past, current and future developments. Coal and Steel versus Iron, Lessons for Today is the title of today's episode, where we focus on Europe in collusion and history of European rapprochement. So, Ambassador Brix, starting with an historical perspective, the Iron Curtain divided Europe right after the Second World War and was the symbol for a long-lasting Cold War that was dominating the continent for decades. Which role, in your opinion, did this geopolitical conflict play in the implementation process of the European Coal and Steel Community and later on of the European Union?
Well, the most interesting thing is that the European integration process is not a product of the Cold War. One might even say it was the other way around. This integration process started with the idea that after these two world wars in Europe, with the given situation of so many states and nation states, we need to overcome historical conflicts. And this is not by chance that it was the most important conflict of the 20th century in Europe, the conflict between France and Germany, which was at the really foundation of this process. Secondly, it's very important to understand that this process did not start with a real integration in the case of politics, culture, and you mentioned it, but with something that was regarded to be essential for making it impossible to start war again. That was cooperation in steel and coal and iron. And so at the very founding bed of the European integration was the economic cooperation in order to make war impossible, and the idea that the long-lasting conflict between these two continental powers, France and Germany, can be overcome. But this was not the end of the story, because when this integration process continued, it became more and more clear that there was this Iron Curtain which divided the idea of a Western Europe from an Eastern Europe. There were various attempts in the early times of the integration to overcome this. Just think about the Marshall Plan concept, where there was a chance that a country like Czechoslovakia could join it, but as soon as the Soviets realized that this would mean integration, also possibly economic and political integration in a Western concept, they did not allow that to go forward. And at the same time, for the Western powers, it was suddenly became obvious that if there is a European integration of this economic part, which might become a political one, what about the cooperation with the transatlantic partner, the United States of America? So NATO appeared on the radar to have a very important European integration project where America is not only involved, but leading until nowadays. So you see, there were a lot of original sins, you might call it, already in the beginning of the integration process, which did not really hinder the integration to go forward. So this was clear, but it meant from the very beginning that this idea that the European Union can resemble Europe was never really true. It was always a concept for peacemaking in parts of Europe. And cooperation in parts of Europe, but the assessment of and the self-understanding of this integration process that this is the nucleus of a common Europe. And actually this idea became more and more popular because there was enlargement. As we know, in the early 70s, enlargement of northern, richer countries, and the end of the 70s and early 80s, the southern rim, after the totalitarian period, the southern rim, and certainly then in the 90s, the integration of countries like Sweden and Austria and Finland, and then later on the Visegrad countries, and Croatia and Bulgaria, as in Romania, as we know. So it is very clear that there must be collusions in the idea of how we see the integration process, because there is this inner drive of the process to cover the whole of Europe, but at the same time there are blocks built in against it. I would say, for instance, the role of NATO is blocking the integration of the European Union becoming a real European force. Maybe some member countries would not agree with this position, but it's certainly for a country like Austria, this is a problem. And when you look now into the discussions between the US administration and the German administration, for instance, about defense policy in Europe, you can see that there is a starting confrontation between who defends Europe, whatever what it means. So I would say the beginning of coal and steel and iron was important to make it possible to integrate the free part of Europe, but from the very beginning it created also problems.
You mentioned this NATO structure, but I think some member countries or non-member countries regard NATO structure actually as the very basis of defense mechanism of Europe. So how would you solve this problem to make Europe more European, as you said?
Well, it becomes more and more clear that the Pax Americana, which was an idea of the time after the Second World War, is getting less and less important and less relevant. It is still there, obviously, as we can see, but when you look into the real situation, I don't think that a majority of Europeans will continue to believe that we need this missile defense against Russian attacks. It's different in some countries with former Soviet experience, like the Baltics, but also Poland. But overall, I think this idea is becoming less and less real. So that means in Europe, the idea is growing that do we need the American defense shield, or should we have a European defense? And maybe this is the precondition for having a European foreign policy. So all the discussions about the common European and security policy depend also on the defense issues. And as long as we cannot solve this problem, so we're always trying to sort of knit over it, saying that the NATO is doing its part and the EU is doing its part and we are cooperating on so many issues. Yes, fine, that's okay. But there is a final problem in it which we in the European Union will have to solve in the future.
So you touch upon already that maybe the people's expectations of European Union and of NATO structure in general might be different already today. So I would like to ask you, how are these expectations changing during the time? What were expectations back then during the time of the Soviet Union? What are current expectations?
Yeah, well, the question is, what is more basis of the European integration? Is it the idea of welfare and economic success, or is it the idea of freedom, liberty, security? And I think there has always to be a balance in the way we create a common Europe, and it looks different from different parts of the geographical Europe. It is fully understandable that the former Warsaw Pact member countries feel that NATO and security issues and defense issues are more important to their country than the European Union. And by the way, I see this one of the reasons why the European Union has so many problems with Poland, for instance. Because for Poland, NATO membership and the US partnership looks simply to be more important than the European integration project. And this is not understood in many Western European countries. So there start already the problems that we have. As I said, it's not possible to overcome this notion that it's either security or its economic success. We will not overcome as long as we don't create a European Union which is a player on its own. And that means nowadays being less dependent on the United States of America, frankly speaking.
What you just described, we also witnessed this during the Corona crisis in the last couple of months. That when it comes to medical material and so on, we were just we didn't have a sufficient of these. So I think it also relates to these fields, not only to the defense. So my question would be how we can overcome these various national, let's say, interests of EU member countries, because we also still can see even after 30 years that there is this East-West divide. People are speaking about multi-speed Europe. The perception of citizens in Central, Eastern, Southeastern Europe can be perceived in the West as second-class citizens, let's say. And since you have also many experiences in Austrian diplomatic services, and Austria always cares about its role, let's say, as a bridge between the old and new and future ones, member states. I would like to ask you how we can overcome this divide and how we can even, is it possible even to find a consensus amongst so many EU member states, also regarding if it comes to enlargement to the southeastern part of Europe?
It's obvious that the divisions in the European Union are growing. There is this East-West divide and also the North-South divide, and I'm not sure which one is more dangerous. They're both actually very dangerous. And you're also right saying that Austria has always looked for a situation of being a bridge builder. Not a bridge, but a bridge builder. This has to do with our multinational tradition in the last 500 years and the idea that we still have this in our genes, this sort of mentality of understanding everybody who is around us. By the way, it includes also that we want to be loved by everybody around us without loving ourselves, some of our neighbors, but this is maybe beyond the point here. How do we overcome this? I think, first of all, let's realize that it exists and what it means for the individual member countries. I would say point number one is here that we are falling back on the position like Charles de Gaulle said, that we have Europa der Vaterländer, a Europe of fatherlands, that the nation state gets control of things that he still thinks he can offer more direct, ask for more direct solidarity than the European Union. And you mentioned already the COVID-19 crisis, where for a majority of people the anchor of last resort was the nation state and was the health system in the member states of the European Union, because this is competence of each member state, and not of of Brussels, not of the European Union. So we have to really look into: do we have a system in the European Union which allows us to give to the member states all those possibilities that they want to have in this sort of crisis situation? And coordinate only in those areas where it is positive to coordinate and where it's helpful to coordinate. And there are many areas, not only the health problem, where I think we can still look for these sort of things where we may act differently. Secondly, if we want to do more together in the European Union, we have to be frank and say, at the moment we have double standards in various areas in the European Union. The way we treat some of the newer members in Central and Eastern Europe, as far as minorities is concerned, nationalism is concerned, all these issues, is much more critical than what we say about other parts of the European Union. Just one example, Spain. When you look into the judicial system of Spain, when you look into how the confrontation between Catalonia, the Basque, and the center in Madrid is dealt with, the European Union is not interfering at all. And when the Catalonians ask for support, even the president of the European Commission is saying, no, we have no competence there. But when something happens in Warsaw or something happens in Hungary, I'm not defending many of these things, but it's a different response. So these sort of double standards are not very helpful for the trust that people should have in this European Union. And the third point, I think, is that we should try to be bold. If we really feel that the integration process can go forward, we need to talk about education and culture as something which the European Union should do together. Much more than it is done now, we need to put on the organizational side competencies to Brussels, common competencies in the field of culture and education, which is, I'm afraid, not very realistic. But if we really want to change the situation in Europe, we should do this. And I would say Austria would be a good place to start such a discussion, because we understood, for instance, that it was exactly these issues which brought the end to the Habsburg monarchy. It was because we did not respond to the cultural needs of the parts of the Union. It was because in our educational system we couldn't create a common idea, a multinational idea. So we should learn from these sort of failures that we have experienced in Central Europe for the future of the European Union. We should at least try to. If we don't uphold, if we make these piecemeal reforms, we continue with them, we might end at a point where even the breakup of this union is possible. Look at what the Brexit situation, which obviously is not a special case of the United Kingdom not understanding that they are also part of a family here in Europe, but it's about they don't accept this piecemeal going forward, which they say we did never accept. And this may happen not today, but tomorrow also in other parts of the European Union. So I would be very careful continuing with this piecemeal attempt. And if we make bigger steps, which I see necessary, we have to convince majorities in the member countries, because without asking them, without referenda about these issues, there is no way forward. I strongly believe that after Schengen and after Euro, the next big project will not be accepted by the Europeans without referenda in all the member countries, which is very difficult.
So you mentioned already that education and culture are two fields which should be on the agenda for the years to come. We can see still that this nation-oriented mindset is still rooted deeply in the perception of people. And I think that this fact also contributes significantly to the negative, in many cases, negative perception of the EU. So do you think that some European agenda in education and culture could overcome these obstacles? Could you tell us or shed more light on concrete proposals which you would like to present regarding, for example, the education or culture? Which strategies should be introduced in order to integrate more in these two fields?
Well, normally I would say if you want to change something in politics, you have to start by convincing people that they want to have these changes. In the case of the European Union, I am not fully convinced that this is working, because just think about how many intellectuals have been asking about the European Republic and so on. I think in the context of the European Union, we have to go into the organizational structure. So it is the only way forward, I see, is that we can convince the responsible ministers for education and culture to discuss the possibility of a common competence, a shared at least common competence on education and culture. But this would be a real game changer, because just think about school books. It's absolutely national competence. So every school book, history books, can write in whatever they want, more or less whatever they want. And the consequence is that we don't even have common history books for neighboring countries. We are trying hard, as you know, between the Czech Republic and Austria. There is a common history book now, and there is even one between Poland and Russia. We tried at least, but it's not working. It's not working in a European context. And this will only be possible if we try to make this move to the European level in the field of education. And culture looks to be easier, because when you ask artists or other cultural figures, they always say we don't care about the nation. We care about the world, we care about progress, we care about fairness, and we care about Black Lives Matter or whatever. But in reality, they are very much dependent on these nation states, in some countries more, in other countries less. But in Austria, we see in the COVID crisis how much artists are dependent on the money and support they get from the nation state, not from Europe or somewhere else. And this is true for many countries. I know the example of the United Kingdom, where there it doesn't play a real matter, because artists have never been really financed, with exceptions by the public coffers, by public budgets. But it's different in Central Europe, where we are used to that culture is supported. I'm very much in favor of it, but it means, again, there is some dependency on the nation state, on the way they present cultural products and so on. And there, I think we have chances to go forward. And again, Austria might be a good example, because we have the most important culture festival, at least the European Culture Festival. We have the Salzburg Festival every year, where there have been already initiatives to create something like a cultural Davos, a meeting of minds every year during the festival, which is what Davos means for business and for the economy. These are very good ideas which we should follow to make these changes possible.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Brix. I think it was a nice conclusion for the end of our discussion. Thank you very much for sharing with us your opinions, and thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. All the best. Thank you.
So this was the CEE, Central Europe Explained, an IDM podcast powered by Erste Group. Thank you for listening, and see you next week for a new episode.
IDM Podcast.
Institut für den Donauraum und Mitteleuropa.
Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe.
European Perspectives.
Regional Actions.
Cooperation and expertise since 1953.